Thanks everyone for joining. My name's Alan Mueller. I work for Eaton Corporation. I'm a principal architect, and I'm going to talk today about a very fun project I've been working on for the last several months. So I want to talk about Eaton. So there was a question earlier in the room about Eaton. 200 ERPs may be a stretch, but we have a lot. So we've grown by acquisition. We have about 96,000 employees. We're a global company. We work in all the continents, except for Antarctica. We have a lot of our focus on power management. So we do mid-range electrical distribution equipment. We work on hydraulics equipment. We have transmissions. We have a vehicle group that works on valves. So we're very widely spread based, but mainly we manufacture things that people put in other things. So a lot of you probably haven't heard about Eaton. We're about $22 billion company right now. Okay? And as Dave mentioned, we've grown by acquisition. So we will buy a plant or a company that has several plants, and the strategy that our management team has adopted is that we're going to buy those plants, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to switch out their ERP systems, which is great for them, but in IT, it causes us a lot of problems, right? So we have all these ERP systems that are doing business, and we have to figure out what's going on. Okay, a little about me. Okay, so I've been around a while. I've had an interesting career. I have way too many hobbies, and I really love my family. So that's me in a nutshell. And joining me is Puneet, and Puneet's been...
Yeah, so I've been with MarkLogic for about 9 years now, and my responsibilities include helping out Eaton various initiatives on the solution architect side. And yeah, I've played many roles in MarkLogic over the last 9 years.
Okay, cool. So that's us. And okay, so I want to talk a little about our BI landscape and why we're even looking at MarkLogic in the first place, right? So we've grown to 22 billion, roughly, through a lot of acquisitions. We have 200 kind of, it depends on who you talk to. I'm not even sure we know what all our source systems are, right? We have a lot. We have a lot of data warehouses. We used to have, and this was great fun, we used to have 3 IT organizations. So you can imagine that kind of a dynamic going on when you try and get an enterprise picture of your data, and you've got different groups with different priorities. We have a lot of vertical solutions. This is actually a simplified diagram of our current landscape. So I think it's better over here. So here's some questions we struggle with, obviously, right? So how is a hurricane going to affect our supply chain? Who are our suppliers? Which ones are associated with which product line in which plant? So we have trouble with that. Recently, it's been commodity tax changes. What's that going to do to us? So, our customers, what are we ordering? What are we buying? How much taxes are going to affect us? And who should we focus our marketing efforts on? Our customer data is in those ERP systems, so we have to bring that all together. We have to bring together the orders they're placing, the products, and we have to figure out the pricing because our pricing is very variable. So these are questions things we have trouble with, and MarkLogic and building a MarkLogic Hub is part of our answer for solving that problem. Okay, and that's this, right? So we started, and I'll back up a little bit. So we recognized we needed a hub, and then last year I did a presentation on this, so I'm kind of condensing it, but I think it's important for this discussion. We realized we needed a hub, and we started building one with the technologies we had at hand. So we used a relational database, and we had ETL, and we got data modelers, and they went out and gathered requirements for a lot of ERP systems, and we tried to build our hub using an Oracle database. It could have been any relational database. This is not a knock on Oracle. It's more about the technology itself, right? And so we built a third normal form canonical data model. And we started with one subject area, or what we call one subject area, was sales and orders, right? And the results were this. So we found out it was very difficult to design, it was very inflexible, and it was very costly. And basically, it didn't work. So we had long delays for getting data in use because we had requirements efforts where people went across and tried to rationalize very cautiously what every ERP system provided. And as they did that, and you added more ERP systems, people got more and more cautious because they didn't want to change the data model later because that would break the ETL and also change what we were doing on the consuming side. So that whole dynamic of dealing with a static model and how that rippled through the projects really affected our delivery ability with the relational database. So we missed opportunities. We didn't realize any benefits, and that acronym CERP there, which stood for Conceptual ERP, has become kind of a cuss word, if you will, in Eaton. So to say it nicely, unfortunately, I'm the one who coined it, so I have to kind of like that. So the idea was good though, but the technology we tried to use was wrong. Okay. All right, oh, and here it is, right. So I just kind of walked through this. We never did complete it. We didn't even complete, after 2.5 years, we didn't even complete sales and orders. So it just didn't work well. The business logic and the ETL layer, we're still unraveling that as we move into MarkLogic, and it just didn't work out well. So that's maybe a different discussion, but MarkLogic was definitely what we wanted to do. We did a proof of concept with MarkLogic. We realized that we could reduce the FTE effort using MarkLogic just by the fact that the data structures can be built dynamically. Just doing that and some of the things with the languages, we could reduce the amount of FTE effort by 75%. So now something that took 2 years would go to 6 months. That's a little more acceptable. We also realized that if we went to an agile model, which I don't think we do very well,
Can you just explain, like, just a little knowledge on what were the issues that you had faced, like just 2 examples, and how MarkLogic exactly helped you?
Okay, I think I'm going to run out of time because we're going to do the demo. Can I handle your question at the end? Yeah, we've got a Q&A period. Sorry, but I won't skip it because it's a good question. All right. So there was if you work in an agile manner, you can even speed up faster. I think there's companies who said they can do things like 10 times faster. And if we did agile really, really well at Eaton, which I don't think we're quite there yet, I could see that happening. And other miscellaneous things, taking the load off our ETL platform, for instance, and simplifying how we pull data, centralizing the logic into the data hub rather than having it scattered around the organization. So the logic to centralize data. So harmonization, what's the word I heard today? Curate, thank you. Curate the data. Okay, so that's a big deal. So we picked MarkLogic to do this, and we're very happy with it, and we've been working in a batch mode. So we're pulling data into MarkLogic. We're using a SQL tool we developed that goes out and runs a whole series of queries and pulls data into MarkLogic. And that's nice, and we can run things a couple of times a day, 3 times a day. But we have a lot of users or use cases where the users want access to the data in real time. Since we're building this integration hub with all this information, we have some services groups that want to provide web services to some of our consumers. We have some folks that want to do more real-time reporting or closer to real-time reporting. So our batch mode is not going to work, and we want to go faster than batch mode, right? And well, okay, there we go. So to do that, there's really 3 pieces. So first is getting the data into MarkLogic as quickly as possible. Then there's what we call envelopes, or we have this transform logic, and we're going to build envelopes, right? That's the data curation part. And then there's the real-time reporting. So as the data is in MarkLogic, you can access it immediately. So there's three parts to that strategy of reducing our data latency. Okay, and I'm going to talk about one part. So this is the data in, this is the ingestion, this is change data capture into MarkLogic. All right, so change data capture, essentially, if anyone here has worked with change data capture in the past, it's a messaging tool for transactions. So it's not actually snapshots of the data. It's information about the transactions. And our tool that we use is Oracle GoldenGate. There's different ones. I think there's an SAP tool called SLT. We have a whole bunch of progress databases, believe it or not, and we use Proto-Aura as a change data capture tool. So depending on what you encounter in your organization, you probably have something like that. I know there's an IBM tool that's very popular. And, okay, here we go. All right. So here's the architecture we have with Oracle. I think it's probably very common, but you'll typically have a source database, and change data capture tools most often work off of the database log files. In Oracle, that's a redo log file. But they'll sit there and they'll monitor the log file, and as they see transactions occur, they get written to the log file. They will grab information out of the database, put it into a queue, then send it across. So there'll be an extract process that's doing that, and then they'll send it across to a replicat process, or replicate. Oracle GoldenGate is so old that they could only use 8 characters in their names. So it's a replicat. So you laugh, but it actually works really well. So, whatever. Right? So that replicat process will, create its own queue and manage the transactions off the queue. And then our talk today is about this little red box right here, which is the adapter that's going to take that data and it knows how to put it into the database you're working with. So in normal relational database world, this is very simple, because you take the insert statements, you break them apart, and you make an insert statement on the same table in the other database. What do you do when you've got MarkLogic and you've got documents? How does that work, right? And that's really what we're going to go through here today. Some other things. So, this is important. So the queuing system is going to supply its own transaction boundaries. That means that as it moves the data across its messaging system and applies it, it will commit the data or roll it back, depending on what you're doing. So for instance, if you're trying to take your transaction and apply it to your target, and something bad happens and there's a failure, then the CDC system will manage that failure, right, and retry next time you start. So it won't take the data out of its queue until you successfully put the data into the target. That's a really important thing, because, and you'll see later, you want to stay within the transaction boundaries when you're working with the CDC system, in general and especially with MarkLogic. Okay. So I'm going to start doing this. I have a series of slides now where I go through and I walk through the transactions. I'm going to walk through the cycle that we went through to arrive at our final design. And I've been told that there's a lot of little boxes and things here, so bear with me. I'm going to go through it. I think it's worthwhile because it kind of shows you the things you have to do when you're working with MarkLogic in a situation like this. So here's a typical Oracle GoldenGate transaction, right? This is Oracle GoldenGate's replicat process. It's going to receive a message that says, hey, a transaction started on the database. And then it's going to receive an operation or a series of operations, right? And this is the data about the transaction. It is not the actual data for the table. There might be some of it in there, but it's going to be something that tells you, on this table, insert this field for this row, right? So it's not going to be a whole copy of the data. And you have to bear that in mind when you're working with it, because you can't take just what's in this operation and apply it. You have to figure out how to apply it into your database. Okay, you're going to get a bunch of those. right? So there could be inserts, deletes, and updates and whatnot. And then GoldenGate is going to get a commit or a rollback. If it's a rollback, obviously you just kind of throw everything away. You don't have to worry about it, right? But if it's a commit, obviously you have to do something on your target database. Okay, and as long as you're operating in the scope of this adapter, if you fail, you're staying inside. If you succeed or fail inside of this adapter, you stay inside of their transaction boundaries, and you're fine. The minute you step out of that, you have to create your own. Okay, so there's two other things to note here. And this may be specific only to Oracle GoldenGate, but there's two modes for their adapters. There's a transaction mode and an operation mode. The transaction mode is less attractive because when you're working in a transaction mode, everything it does stays in the adapter memory up until the time you commit. So if you have a very large transaction, like someone does, updates a 1,000,000 row table and sets the last update date or something like that, you could blow out the memory for your adapter. So you don't want to do that. So there's another mode. It's called operation mode, and that is where the adapter expects you to apply the operations on the target system, and then at the end, you either on the target system commit or roll back. Okay, so that's important because in our progression of things, we want to operate in the operation mode. So I'm going to go through a couple of iterations on what we did for our adapter, and then we'll look at the results. So here's the first pass, and this was an all Java adapter. This is the one that right now is out on GitHub, right? So it's a good foundation to start from. You can look at it, but you get a transaction start. The adapter gets a couple of operations. We'll do an insert and a delete, and then in the end it commits, right? It's got some business rules in the adapter that are embedded into the adapter, and this is MarkLogic, right? You have to create a document somehow. So it's going to have the logic to manage how you're going to update a document. This is going to do all this in the Java code itself, right? And it's going to do the insert and then the update, and then at the end, basically it's done and you have your document in place. Okay, so I've got 10 minutes. Okay, cool. So there's some good things about this first. It works. Okay, there's some bad things though. The transaction mode here is not really good. The document handling part in Java. So as we went through this, we realized there's a lot of situations we're going to encounter with different types of tables, and I don't know exactly how everyone's going to want to deal with those tables. So having that logic in Java is not really good. Okay, and then doing all the document handling in Java is also questionable because you're querying the document, you've got to pull it over to Java, you're going to do something, then you're going to push it back. So that's probably going to be slow if you're in a high-speed situation. Okay, so the next pass, we did this. We broke out a separate process, and it talked about having a Java daemon running, and this Java daemon would basically, so we changed the scope a little bit, so I had the adapter actually write the transaction data to MarkLogic. So instead of keeping it in Java, I'm writing it to MarkLogic. I'm going to do my update on my operation. I'm going to do my final update here. Well, that guy goofed up. Okay, so anyway, we're the same two transaction or operations, and then we're going to go and apply them, right? So the idea was that we have this daemon running, and it's going to see all this transaction stuff, and at some point in time, it's going to go perform the insert and the update, and then do the commit, and you have a document. Okay, but we didn't get too far with this one because now the minute we do this commit here and we're done with the adapter, we've jumped outside of that transaction boundary, and you have to write all that yourself. So you've got to deal with how you handle failure. How do you make sure that you've sequentially applied every transaction? Right. So it's very difficult. So we jumped out of that. The next one says, well, okay, we'll do it all in MarkLogic. We'll use a trigger. So we went through and same thing. we're writing the transaction data into MarkLogic. Then we try to fire a trigger to do the updates, right? Well, ouch, that didn't work because there's limitations on what MarkLogic can do in a multi-document statement. So you get a multi-statement transaction error if you try to process the same document more than once. And if you try and jump out of that and use something like an eval statement, you get into a deadlock. And then you learn about how you have to restart the database to kill a deadlock. So that's no fun. So the good thing though is we did take, for this one, we took the table metadata out of the Java, and we've got that available. It's data. So now how we drive the process of creating the documents is now something that's another document inside MarkLogic. All right. So finally, and this is our final one here, if you hang with me. So this is the adapter. Again, it's going to write the transaction information to MarkLogic, right? And then it's just going to call a process module. It's going to call this process module for each operation. So it's going to cycle through. So I'm not trying to run a trigger to do this. And each time it calls it, it's going to perform the necessary operations. It's going to use the table metadata that I've got there. And then at the end, it's going to clean it all up. Okay, so this is good. So I'm just going to go through. This is the assessment here. So all Java, right? You're probably going to blow away your adapter, right? Guaranteed. The separate process, that was a dumpster fire. I didn't even try and write that one. I got halfway through it and I realized this is really stupid. I'm not even going down this road. So the database trigger, that blew up. It didn't work, and that's not MarkLogic's fault. That's what I was trying to make MarkLogic do, and MarkLogic doesn't work that way. And finally, the Yaha moment was the hybrid Java and MarkLogic. So I think when you work with MarkLogic and you're doing Java things, you're gonna be in this situation a lot. You've got to decide how much do I put in MarkLogic and how much do I run in Java. Okay. How am I doing? You got? Yeah. Okay. All right. So the final result, right? So we've met the things that we wanted to do for our adapter. We're staying inside of the transaction boundaries. We're supporting operation mode. It's extensible. And the big thing is the business rules are outside of the adapter. So now if I want to go write some special code to deal with tables that don't have keys, and I want to do it my own way, I can do that. I don't have to tear into Java or get a Java developer to do it. I can go into XQuery and make the changes as necessary. So it's a lot of flexibility there. Okay. But this is a caveat, right? Change data capture is not perfect. So there's some real gotchas with change data capture. If you're working in a situation where you're querying data from a database, if you're using a view, that won't work with change data capture. That's not a transaction. So data from a view will never make it into MarkLogic. So you have to have some way of going into the system, your source system, and pulling out the logic for those views and figuring out where you're going to apply it in MarkLogic. Either you're going to do it in the harmonization, or when someone extracts the data, you're going to replicate that logic somewhere. Okay. Mass updates. So if you've worked with any kind of a messaging system, you know that mass updates and messaging systems don't match. So if you've got a CDC system hooked up to MarkLogic and someone updates 1 million rows, it's going to take a while. It's not going to be real fast. It'll be probably slower than if you ran a batch at that point. Okay. And then funny things like database tables without keys. What do you do with soft deletes? We have ERP systems that have spaces in the fields, and it actually means something if I can't tear out the spaces, right? But GoldenGate takes the field and just right pads it with the entire to the entire length of the string that it's supposed to be, and you're supposed to figure out what to do. So that can be a pain. So you need some way to deal with the business rules, and that's one of the reasons why I have the XQuery program that we run that deals with all those those rules, and then I have the metadata that helps drive that. Okay. And so that's me. Puneet's going to give a demo. So he actually has an ERP system running on his laptop, which is amazing to me. And he's going to show what's going on with our adapter under the scene.
You want to turn off your mic?
Yep.
Here we go. Right, so for my piece, I have about 5 minutes to do my slides and a live demo. It's running on my laptop. And I hope the demo is still alive. I found my daughter, 9-month-old, climbing on my laptop. She was drooling over the keyboard, so we'll see about that now. All right, so before we get into what Alan was talking about and if there are other options, I just wanted to make one thing clear. Every project I've worked on have their own definition of what is real time. If an application has a real-time requirement, what exactly real-time means to your business. For some people, it might be 1 second delay between your source system and your reporting system. Even that's too much. Some might be okay with a minute, or some might be okay with an hour. So really think about what your requirement is. In the case of Eaton, they might be okay with 4 or 5 seconds, but that was their requirement, right? That they wanted to know about it, that if a product updates have happened, how does business need to react to it? And their SLAs were around 4 or 5 seconds, or maybe second. So always think of what requirement you're trying to cater. That's going to define what strategy you have to implement to capture change data from your source system. And CDC system like GoldenGate is not the only one deployed in the strategy. There are other things that you could do in your infrastructure. I've seen people implemented enterprise message queue. We have one queue that's feeding your source system and also feeding your MarkLogic. That works well if you already have that in place. But if you are greenfield, if you're grown by acquisitions, that might be a different story. You might have 10 different flavors of message queue implemented in your organization. We'll talk about the external orchestrator in detail too. Let me just jump through that. So enterprise message queue, like when exactly you should use that. You can always use that for change data capture. There are a few things you have to keep in mind. All your source systems are already integrated. Having to integrate your new system to an existing MQ is going to turn out to be another cost. You might end up taking more time. You might as well just go CDC route, what Alan was talking about. Mass updates is also a problem. It was a problem in GoldenGate as well, but it's no different in MQ as well. You're going to have to deploy appropriate resources to make this happen. Near real-time use cases, it's probably not possible because message queue always have some sort of delay built in. You can make it real-time by deploying infrastructure accordingly, but that turns out to be a lot more investment, and return is usually not that high. So keep your use case in mind. What value are you getting by deploying an infrastructure for real-time updates? Do you really need that or not? And again, transaction boundary is the main reason Alan went with the GoldenGate, because GoldenGate handles the transaction boundary pretty well. If you don't do that in GoldenGate, you would have to do this from scratch. You have to build the transaction boundary, the sequence of the transaction by yourself. So make sure you don't have those requirements. If you have requirements that are simplified enough, then yeah, you can go ahead and use MQ. Other way is again one of the popular ways nowadays that a lot of people are using. How many people have heard of Apache NiFi? Show me a hand. Right. So Apache NiFi is an open source tool. It's an external orchestrator. What that can do is you can plug in a source system and select MarkLogic as a target. That can get from message queue. It could be a CDC from a source system. It can handle a lot of scenarios. MarkLogic has an official plugin for Apache NiFi. So MarkLogic can be used as a target for your source system in this scenario. Yeah. But keep some of the things in mind. It has some limitation, like with any other system. You need to have complete understanding of your source system. So you need to know exactly what table's going to change, what tables you want to listen to. Your table needs to have primary keys, right? If your system doesn't have any primary key or a way to identify a primary key, this is probably not going to work. And again, this is a polling. So essentially what the NiFi plugin really is doing is actually polling your source system for any changes that happened in the last 5 minutes, for example. So this is more suitable for near real-time use cases, 5 minutes or 2 minutes or delay or so. And just like MQ, it has problems with transactional boundaries, right? Yep. That is one thing I would actually take away. If you have a transactional boundary problem, go with the CDC system. They already take care of that. Don't try to rebuild that whole transactional complexity within your application. With that, we'll jump to the demo now. Let's see. Right, so for the demo, I actually installed an open source ERP system. There are a bunch of those out there. I just picked out one. What I'm going to be doing is I'll add a new product, and let's see if that gets replicated over to MarkLogic. I have MarkLogic running on my laptop. I have GoldenGate set up as a VM on my laptop, and also have this ERP running on my laptop as well, all of them running on the same system. And if you're familiar with MarkLogic, this is a query console. I created a test database. I can just look at the content, and it only has one document in it. And we'll talk about this particular document as well. What's the relevance of this? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a new product by selecting this new product, and let's call it something, and sample product, and we can give it a price. Let's call it 100. And as soon as I hit create, it says its product reference already exists. Let me just change the reference. Right. So as soon as the create happens, it's going to kick off a transaction log on MySQL side, because this is what it's running on. This is the source database for this application. GoldenGate's going to pick up those logs and pass it to the replicat process that Alan was talking about, and eventually get passed on to MarkLogic. And while I was talking, this all was happening. So let's see if we got something in MarkLogic database now. All right, so we got a document now. This document was not there before. It's 17.xml. If you open that, it's going to have all the attributes we just created. Sample product, reference ID 68, with the price of 100, right? Right. We just created this document out of the change data capture system from the source system, right? Oh yeah, I had my doubts, but that's fine. Right. So this is the change data capture in action. There are few complexity that goes behind the scenes, actually. Right? This looks pretty easy, and this is just one document. But Alan just went through a presentation that has 7 steps of processing and interaction that happens. So behind the scene, while this is happening, GoldenGate creates a lot of metadata documents, and it eventually cleans it up, because we don't want to keep those metadata documents around. But if you want to keep those around, what I'm going to do is a demo of a setting that I would enable that would let you know what actually happens behind the scenes when an update happens in your source system. So I'm just updating a property. It's going to take me a second. And I have this remote transaction setting set to true. I'm going to set it to false. And if you are familiar with GoldenGate, all I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the replicate process, the replication process, and restart.
One thing, also, if there's a failure in the adapter, it'll leave all those transaction documents
Right.
in MarkLogic, so you can go and look and see what happened. Otherwise, it cleans them up.
So what I'm going to try to do is, What I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to update the same product we just created. We had the price set to 100. I'm going to modify the price now to, let's say, I can't find the price anymore. So let me just change the label to sample product new. So we just updated the label for that product that we just created. I'm going to hit the save button, and things are happening as soon as I click that. If I hit explore, we get all those metadata documents. And I'm going to open this 17.xml document one more time, and would see, it should have updated, but let's see. No, so this was the thing. But do you want to talk about these metadata documents, what that do?
Right. So actually what's interesting is here's the interesting thing about ERP systems, right? He did one update on a product. He's got 4 operations that happen inside of, 4 transactions happen inside of the database itself, right? So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is the document that tells you about the transaction, and these are the different operations. If you open up an operation, pick one. Oh. Okay. Question about,
I have, yeah, let me get you on mic with the question so that we can cover it.
Yes, so you were explaining about like the initial issues, what you had before using MarkLogic, right? So I just wanted to hear some examples, like what kind of issues was it?
oh, so when we use the relational technology, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, well, so first off, with the relational database, you have a static data model. So you're trying to design something that's not going to change. Well, one of 2 things happens, right? You go into requirements at a requirements effort, and someone's trying to capture all the requirements because they don't want to go back and make a change, because once you change that static data model, right, you've got to redo your ETL, and you may break your consumers. So, and that becomes a very, I'll say, cautious endeavor. So people spend a lot of time on that, and it gets really slow. Or the second thing you do is you say, wow, we're not going to try and get all the requirements, we'll do this iteratively. But the problem with that is then you go back into a cycle where you need to add some fields or change the data model, but then you have to go change the ETL, and then you've got these consumers that are working off that model, and you don't want to break those. So you have to synchronize the whole thing. And this is not conjecture, this is what we experienced, right? So it becomes very difficult and slow. So with MarkLogic, because you can just add data to the document as you want, you can add the basic information first, and then go back and get the stuff that requires more requirements. As you're fleshing out your requirements, first you can start working. You can add more complicated data as you get the requirements, and you don't have to tear apart the whole system. So that was a big deal for us, because going out and analyzing dozens and dozens of ERP systems was very slow.
Just curious to know what ETL tool
Microphone.
are you using it?
Oh,
Sorry.
we're using, so our ETL tool is
Yes.
Informatica.
Okay, so like even we use Informatica in our company, and for our CDC process, we are using Informatica Power Exchange to capture
Just wanted to let you know.
Sure, okay, yeah.
Thanks. Anybody else have questions?
Questions? There's one.
You talk about a lot about the CDC. I'm interested after you the data ingest the MarkLogic, how you do the reporting, operational reporting.
That's a good question. So this is our main focus was getting what we call the raw data into MarkLogic. So this is equivalent to us running a query. So at the end, we have a document that looks like a row in a table. Then we go through an envelope process that we run, and that was the middle part of that diagram where I had the three major components. The middle part is creating that envelope, and we're looking at hooking that up to, we have an enveloping process, so we're saying whenever this document is changed, we want to have some process that goes and figures out what envelope it belongs to and then update that envelope. So that's the second part. And then the third part that we're working on, and I probably blew through that slide because I was running a little slow, but we're looking at different ways to get the data out in real time. One was we're experimenting with TDEs, or template-driven extractions. So you can do SQL queries. And probably we'll also be looking at more high-speed, multi-threaded REST API things to get data out.
Anyone else?
Okay.
No.
All right. All right. Oh, one.
I asked this question earlier in another session, but I'll ask you, the challenges of taking an old antiquated system, say a legacy system that say maybe it's 30 years old, and moving that data into a cloud system. What has been your experience with clients that have had to deal with that? Thank you.
Okay. Well, we are our own client in that case, right? So we have some 30-year-old systems. And the hardest part is finding the subject matter experts. Getting the data into MarkLogic and doing things that you need to do with it, it's not really hard. There's a lot of ways to get the data in. It's finding whoever knows that system and why is this field like this, or why are there dupes, and what was the logic behind this. That's the hardest part. It's usually not too hard to get the data in. So.
Yeah, I want to add one more thing. Am I on? Yes, I am. Okay. So Alan decided to do the logic of harmonization or curation at the MarkLogic layer, because that was the easy thing to do. Having to do that outside of MarkLogic in Oracle system would have been difficult. One reason for that is you have more than one flavor of CDC system within Eaton, right? So you can use the same logic and extend and integrate other system as well. You would just have to write the replicat in another system. The MarkLogic logic would remain the same.
Right. Yeah, we have multiple ERP systems. We have different CDC systems. So our next thing is to go after the next biggest one and work on a MarkLogic adapter for that. So then we'll just keep going along and get to the point where everything hopefully is in using a CDC tool. We're still figuring out how to deal with views. So.
Anyone else? No questions? Terrific. Well, I want to thank you both very much for your time. We appreciate it. I want to remind you all, if you haven't downloaded the MarkLogic World app, to please do so. There's a survey at the end we'd really appreciate you filling out. In fact, if you fill out your surveys, you can enter into a drawing for a $250 Amazon gift card. It's not bad. Next up in this room in a little bit is the Data Hub Performance Optimization session. So if you want to stick around, we'll be here. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and thank you so much for coming by.